What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me yet again for another video. In my last two videos, I went over the most effective and useful forms of cardio, and then I went over exactly how to program in your cardio prescription for how often and how much of each type of cardio you should be doing. So if you have any questions about that sort of stuff, go ahead and watch my very last two videos that I posted about those things. In this video, I'm going to go over why we separate forms of cardio, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what overtraining is. Now, overtraining is a weird subject because if you do a Google search or even a YouTube search here on YouTube, you're going to find all kinds of different answers, anywhere from there's no such thing as overtraining to overtraining is very easy to do with a little amount of exercise. And although both of those things are extreme, neither of those you can find a lot of truth in. So I'm going to bring some clarity to the subject of overtraining, and this will make it a little more clear why we separate different forms of cardiovascular training when combined with strength training or hypertrophy training. And let's just clear that up real quick. First of all, when we're looking at this chart that I drew up here, this is a health risk range from high health risk to low health risk as we're going lower on the chart here. Now this at the top is going to represent no exercise. So no exercise on a daily basis is going to put you at a very high health risk. That being said, the goal is to lower the health risk, but at the same time, and this is important, as your health risk lowers, your adaptation to exercise increases. So if we also think about this as lowering your health risk, but also increasing your adaptation to exercise. Now, what is adaptation to exercise? Well, if you're doing cardio training, you're trying to improve your VO2 max or your cardiovascular endurance. And in doing so, you actually become more efficient with your training. Now, if you're trying to adapt to hypertrophy style training, that means you're trying to actually grow the size of your muscle. And the adaptation to hypertrophy is increasing the size of the muscle, which is useful for a lot of people to have more muscle. The adaptation to strength training then is going to be actually to improve strength. Now, the difference between building the size of the muscle and building the strength of the muscle is strength is measured for how much you can do for one repetition. And that's it. Well, building the size of your muscle has more to do with muscular endurance, and that's how much weight you can lift for more repetitions. So it's important to distinguish the two because they're not the same. Building the size of your muscle is not guaranteed to build strength. Although it will help, you can get very strong without actually increasing the size of your muscle. But to be considered athletic, in my opinion, you need to have a good mix of both. And you need to include cardiovascular training or improving your VO2 max or improving your endurance to match the size of your muscle and the strength of your muscle. And that is how we become well-rounded when it comes to being an athletic person, which the goal for me, for everybody, is to become more athletic, to get stronger, to have more muscle, and to have better endurance. So that all being said, the risk for health events and the adaptation for exercise is going to be high. Let me clarify. The health risks are going to be high, but the adaptation to exercise is going to be low. So think about the top of the chart is low adaptation. Obviously, you're not going to adapt if you're not doing any exercise, but the health risks are going to be high at the same time. Now, as we get into this chart and we get into the volume of training, and I'm going to classify that also as a duration of training. Now, what we know here is that if you exercise on a daily basis, you take your health risk from high to low, and over time that compounds. Over time of training every day, you're lowering your risk for health events, but at the same time you're adapting to the training. Now, something happens whenever we compound too many intense training techniques on top of each other, and the health risk actually starts to go up, and the adaptation to training starts to go down. That's important to mention here that right around the 40-minute time mark is when that happens. Now, that's different for everybody as far as what the time mark is when your body starts to go into this overtraining cycle and starts to stop adapting to exercise and starts to increase your health risk. But I'm going to say that's give or take like 10 minutes. It's not a lot. So 30 to 50 minutes, somewhere right in between there. But I split the difference to 40 because that's highly individualized depending upon the person that we're talking about. Now, when you're doing high intensity interval training, hypertrophy training, strength training, or high intensity steady state training, The issue is we have to somehow separate the training with a certain duration of time to sort of reset this chart so that you don't start to regress at this period. So what I'm saying is, if you were to do 30 minutes of high intensity interval training, let's just say that that's right here at this mark. If you were to do 30 minutes of HIIT, you might have already reached the state of overtraining because it's individualized somewhere between 30 and 50 minutes. Now, if you were to pile on top of your high intensity interval training, any type of hypertrophy training, any type of strength training, or any type of high intensity steady state training, you're almost guaranteed to go into the state of regression where you're at that point overtraining. So at that point, low intensity steady state cardio becomes very useful if you're a person that just doesn't have a lot of time to separate your training or doesn't have time to do 2 training sessions or more per day. So if you're really trying to optimize your health, yes, you are going to exercise every day, but the type of exercise you choose is going to be highly dependent upon this chart here. You can substitute HIIT with hypertrophy, strength, or high intensity steady state cardio. And you can see that if you were to compound those types of training on top of each other, you're going to reach your overtraining or regression model here pretty fast when we're talking about the training. So instead, what we would do, and this is why we'd want to separate our training by a certain minimum amount of time. If you were to do high intensity steady state training, high intensity interval training, hypertrophy training, or strength training in a day, you can compound low intensity steady state either before or after that training, but the other types of training need to be separated by a minimum of 2 hours, but optimally it would be 4 hours. So this is a very clear model of kind of a timestamp of where overtraining starts to begin, where adaptation starts to decrease, and where your health risk starts to increase yet again if you compound too many types of training on top of each other. Now, this is coming from a person who has advanced in my fitness every year for the past 15 years. I'm going to be 42 here in just a few short days. My running this summer was faster than ever. I maintained more muscle mass than I ever have while completing running. All my powerlifting lifts are heavier than they've ever been because I constantly advance my information, my knowledge, and my application of those two so that I can constantly progress with my training. Now, my goals as an athlete are to run fast, to be a proficient runner at all types of different distances, anywhere from a 5K to an actual marathon, while at the same time maintaining a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of muscle mass. And in order to do that, you really don't have a lot of leeway with your training. You really don't have a lot of time to mess around and start to regress in this model. So instead, what we want to do is we want to train very effectively, very efficiently, separate our training cycles, or if you just don't have time, compound some low intensity steady state wherever you want to. And that's going to be the goal, is to choose the appropriate form of training depending upon what your training cycle looks like in an annual schedule. So if you're getting into this annual schedule where in the wintertime, for example, up here in northern Minnesota, it is just not congenial to run outside right now, or to ride a bike outside, or to do any endurance outside. Now, I'm not saying that I don't spend time on cardio equipment. I do. I spend quite a lot of time on cardio equipment this time of year, but it's mostly low intensity, steady state cardio because I am doing strength training 2 times a week, sometimes 3, and I am doing hypertrophy training at least 1 day a week. So that doesn't give me a lot of leeway as other forms of cardio to use. Now, as I advance into my spring training, when I'm focusing more on endurance, I'm going to pepper in a lot of different types of cardio that aren't low intensity steady state for that reason. I'm going to do some high intensity interval training with my running. I'm going to do some high intensity steady state with my running. And I'm also going to do some strength training and some hypertrophy training. But at that point, it's going to be maintenance. It's not going to be a main priority. It's going to take a back burner a little bit. It's going to take a back seat to the rest of my training. So that's how I personally train annually to get the most out of my fitness. Now, it is good to have an annual training cycle where you focus on certain things for a specific amount of time, and then you move on past those things for the rest of the time if you want to get good at everything, which everybody should. You should be just as proficient at your endurance as you are at your strength and the size of your muscle. So that's what we want to do. So let's just summarize real quick. Your health risk with no exercise is very high. as you begin on a daily basis to exercise, your health risk is going to lower. It doesn't matter what form of training you use, your health risk will lower. Any one of these is going to count. But as soon as you get around the 30, 40 minute mark, you have to be very careful about spacing out your training so that you're not compounding two high volume, high intensity training sessions directly on top of each other, or there will be some sacrifice your body has to make. And usually in that sacrifice, it doesn't adapt to any of the training. So if you're to compound some of these more intense training methodologies on top of each other, instead of your body deciding which one it's going to adapt to, it just doesn't adapt to any of them. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're trying to move forward. And to me, the mindset of that is, if a person's just trying to burn calories, they work out haphazardly in hopes that they burn calories as their main function. Now, if calories is your main function, if burning calories is your main function, if you're trying, for example, to out-train a bad diet, number one, it doesn't work. Number two, you're going to be riddled with injuries nearly all the time. Injuries, aggravations, and you're not going to adapt. So it's very smart to schedule your training in a way that leads to your health risk decreasing and leads to your adaptation improving to the exercise. So hopefully this is beneficial. I'm going to ask you guys to hit that like button, to ring the bell for notifications. That way you get a notification every time I put out a new video, and you don't have to scroll your feed to look for one of my new videos. And on top of that, if you would subscribe, it would mean a lot to me. So thanks for watching. As always, if you have any questions, make sure you put those in the comments below and I'll get those answered for you. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.